Hello everybody, my name is Walter and this is the 20th episode of my Redstone Commands series. In this episode I want to cover the loot command. Now this command is pretty similar to the give command or the item command insofar that it is used to create items either in an inventory or in the world. The main difference here is that the items are not specified directly. Instead you tell the game what loot table you want to use to generate those items, which makes this quite useful if you, for example, working with mini games and you want to randomize your prices, just as an example. Now, before I get to the syntax, let's quickly talk about what loot tables are. They are basically a list of items with the corresponding drop probabilities and conditions that are used when an item needs to be created in most instances. So when you mine a block, that block has a loot table, and according to that loot table, you get the block back. So if you mine a grass block and you don't have a silk touch tool, then you get a dirt block. If you have a silk touch tool, you get the grass block. That's a loot table basically. Or if you mine ore, you get more or less depending on the enchantments of your pickaxe or tool or whatever. The loot tables themselves can potentially be found in data packs in a subfolder called loot tables. And via the data packs, you can change what is dropped when you mine certain blocks or kill certain mobs. Or you can make your own loot tables for mini games and so on. Now, this is basically what a loot table is about. The syntax for the loot table can be found in the wiki, so I won't go through it since there are many options and this would just be too much for this episode here. And with that, it's time for the syntax. So the syntax is somewhat simple, but you have a lot of options you can choose from. So you start as usual with the name of the command, then you specify where you want the items to be placed, the target, and then you specify where you want the items to get created from, so which loot table to use. Now for target, there are 5 different options you can use, and for source, there are 4 different options. So in total, there are 20 different combinations, so I will go first through the various targets and then through the various sources. The first target you can use is the inventory of a player. So you can give the items directly to a player, which is basically the same as if you were to use the give command. So you start with loot, then give, and then you specify the player via either the player name or a target selector. Here you can also target multiple players at the same time. Each will get basically items from the same loot table. Second option, similar, but now the target is actually a block with an inventory. Here you use insert and then the coordinates of the block. Third option is just placing the items in the world as loosely floating items. So here the target is spawn followed by the spawn coordinates x, y, z. The last 2 options are very similar to what you have seen in the previous episode for the item command. The first is placing it in a specified inventory slot of a block, and the second, the same for an entity. So replace, block, then the coordinates of that block, then the slot number of that, or slot name of the inventory slot, and then optionally a count of how many items you want to place. So a number between 1 and 64. The default, if you don't specify it, is 1. Similarly, if you want to place it in the inventory slot of an entity or multiple entities, replace, then entity, then the entity itself, so either player name, unique identifier, or target selector. Then again the slot and the count optionally. The various slot numbers I already mentioned in the previous episode, so I won't bore you with a repeat here. With that, let's get to the sources. So here you have 4 options. The first is using the loot table you will get for killing a specific entity or multiple entities. So you start with kill, and then you specify the entity. This can again be a player name, this can be a unique identifier, or this can be a target selector. This is basically emulating you killing that mob, more or less. Second option, loot. Here you exactly and definitely specify a loot table to use. So you're not saying, okay, give me the loot table of whatever I'm killing. No, you say, okay, give me the loot table of a witch, or give me the loot table of mined cobblestone block or whatever. Third option is a bit more out of the field, in my opinion, which is fish. Fishing has its own loot tables, and those can be used here via the word fish. Then you specify the loot table to use for the fishing, then where you want to fish, which tool you want to use, optionally. Alternatively, you can also specify whether you want to fish with your main hand or offhand. The main interesting factor is when you're working with a tool and it has an enchantment that has to do with fishing, so that the probabilities are changed. Fourth and last option is mine. This basically emulates you mining that block. So mine, then the coordinates of that block, x, y, z. So you're basically emulating mining of an existing block that is currently in the world. And then you can specify to use a specific tool, or do it with your main hand, or do it with your offhand. And now let's finish with just a few examples. So the first example I have here is giving myself what I would get if I killed the nearest sheep. So as you can see, I have 3 sheep here, a brown one, a blue one, and a black one. And if I use this command and I'm closest to the brown sheep, I get the brown wool. If I use it and I'm close to the blue one, I get the blue wool, and the last one shouldn't be a surprise. So as you can see, pretty interesting, and it's a command that depends entirely on your surroundings. So this can be, for example, something for mini games or so on, where you want to use the timing involved for the loot tables. Next, fishing. So this is a bit interesting and may sound a bit crazy. So what I'm doing here is I'm spawning the items to be created basically directly in front of me, and I'm using the loot table an igloo chest would have during fishing if it used its main hand. So basically, if a mimic went fishing. So what will happen? Well, let's test this out. And you can see the items I'm getting are basically the items that would be created on a randomized igloo chest. So here, the fishing, instead of using a fishing loot table that contains fishes and trash and so on, it uses basically the creation or inventory loot table of the igloo chest itself. So interesting side fact, but it's usually more interesting to use it with a player or so on. Anyway, next example. Here, I'm putting the to be created item in my offhand slot, and I'm mining the block below me with a pickaxe, a diamond pickaxe, with a silk touch enchantment. That's what this here does. And if I do this, you can see, since I'm standing on a dot block, or a grass block, and I'm using a silk touch, I'm getting a grass block. If I were to use a non-enchanted diamond pickaxe, I would only get a dirt block. And well, let's actually show you one more example. If I go a bit further back, now I'm standing on a different block. You can see now I get a different block. So again, pretty interesting. And the last example, let me quickly show you. This chest is currently empty. And this last example will put the to be created items inside of this chest I just opened. And the loot table to use is that of a witch. And if I do that, you can see now it created, well, in this instance, 2 sticks. And if I do this again, some redstone and now some glowstone, and now 2 different items, which, well, sugar and spider eye, and so on and so on. So this might be interesting if you want to emulate the output of mob farm and want to test your sorting system or so. So this can be used in those places. But anyway, this is basically all I wanted to talk about concerning the loot command. I hope you enjoyed this little episode, and well, see ya.